continuing my story of the great Jaki Byard and myself with Jaki. After we did the concert at Harvard, well, even before then, while we were still in New York, I would come by the Village Gate and sit in with Jaki. He was playing solo piano there 4 or 5 nights a week. So often there were not many people in there. And the headliners were on the weekends at that time. During the week sometimes, the Village Gate was just like a little piano bar on top of the gate. He's where Jaki would play. And I would sit in with him there and we'd just play duets. But there was always a set of drums there too that was set up. I don't know why it was there, but may have belonged to Billy Taylor's trio, who was there a lot too. So John Foster, a piano player who played with Mingus for a while, and I believe John died young. But that summer he was hanging out with Jaki. He was, as we used to say, shadowing Jaki. So he'd come and sit in, and then Jaki would sit at the drums, and John would play piano, and I'd play duets with John, or a trio with Jaki on drums. Played nice drums. So we'd do that. And Jaki had another gig on Sundays when he didn't play the gate. He had a gig at a place called Club 82 in the East Village, which was a very interesting gig for I believe I was an 18-year-old kid, and we would play for male, how did you call it, male transvestite strippers, basically burlesque. We would play tunes and they would take their clothes off, and they were dressed like women, and they would wear scanty clothing, and it was men. Strange gig. A funny thing that Jaki said the night after we played for the first time, after I had played Just Friends, and then we played the whole set, and Jaki said to me, he bought me a glass of wine, which was nice. He snuck me a wine spritzer, because it was still under drinking age in New York. 18, drinking age was 21. But he gave me a little red wine, and he said, how old are you? And I said, I'm 18. He said, well, I want to tell you, he said, you are a virtuoso musician at 18 years old. I was 17, he said, at 17, you are a virtuoso musician. And I was like, wow, He said, I tell you this because I was a virtuoso musician at 17 years old, but they didn't tell me. And I laughed and I said, I bet they did. He said, actually they did, but we laughed about it. But he said, I can tell that. And so then when he asked me to come up to Harvard and play a concert with him, which I ended up playing a concert with him, I didn't play the whole concert, but he brought me up for 3 tunes. And I played with him, and Alan Dawson was on drums. That was the first time I got to play with Alan, who I got to play with more later in life, but never enough. Wonderful drummer. And Buell Neidlinger was the bass player. Buell was a bitch. Buell was a great bass player. And he was just on his way to go out to California and work with the Mothers of Invention, with Frank Zappa, because Buell was very forward-thinking. He liked to go out and play free music and be on the edge, but he could play straight down the middle, too. Buell was something else. I don't know what happened to him. Maybe he's still around. If you are, hello, Buell. Anyway, so I came up to Boston, and Jaki suggested that if I wanted to, I could come to his class at New England Conservatory, and he said function as kind of his helper. He said, because I knew most of the stuff he was going to be showing, but I felt I probably don't, and I'm sure whatever he can show, even if I know it, when he shows it, it's going to be different. And I was right. So he gave this class, I think it was, 2 or 3 days a week at New England, a workshop where people played. And I played in the workshop and, helped some of the students in there, because I was a little more advanced than a lot of them, probably most of them. And what I did was funny. It was my college education, which is a funny story of how I became a student at New England Conservatory without becoming a student at New England Conservatory. The way that goes is, my father lived in Boston, outside of Boston, in Sharon, Massachusetts. But the problem with living with my dad and my stepmother was they got up every morning at 7 o'clock to go into town and work. And then they went home at 5 o'clock. And so if I wanted to go back to their place, I had to go back with them at 5 o'clock. And my life was just beginning at 5 o'clock. I couldn't go back to Sharon. It's a small town outside of Boston. So that posed a kind of problem. One person I met there was a guy named Stanley Sagov, who's still around. And, you know, I love Stanley. Stanley was a very good friend to me and an influence. You know, he had sessions, he was a little older. Stanley was a doctor, a medical doctor, who was a student of Jaki's and very serious about playing music, which he still is. And Stanley would have these sessions at his house. And for the next year or so, whenever I was in Boston, for the next couple of years, I would often go to Stanley's house and we would jam with a lot of fine musicians up there. And, you know, so I would sometimes stay at Stanley's house. But I found my friend David Reskin, who was a very good buddy of mine from Florida. We had gone to junior high school, and then when I came back to Florida in high school, we had actually had a band together with Duffy Jackson in high school, where we played Bach Inventions and Blues in F. And we could also play Yesterdays without really playing on the changes, but we tried. Anyway, David was a heck of a good flute player, and he had a scholarship. He was studying over at University of Miami. David's mother was a great violinist named Joan Field, who had, I believe, debuted Charles Ives' work in the United States, and was a tremendous musician who coached us with our Bach playing. And Joan was also, David and Joan, when I was in junior high school in Florida, would play classical music for me and really taught me the basics of, you know, how to identify Beethoven from Brahms and that type of thing, you know. And who was who in the zoo, as a friend of mine used to say. So David was going to the New England Conservatory, and he happened to have a roommate named Gordon, who was a piano player, who was blind, and he was on the road with a show band, and he would only come into the conservatory for exams. And when he did that, I'd sleep on the box spring, and he'd sleep on the mattress on the floor. So we all got along fine. And David said, well, you might as well move into my room. So I did, because downstairs in Jordan Hall, which is the dormitory residence, were practice rooms where you could practice all night long. And, you know, if you came in at 3 a.m, you could practice till 6. If you got up and it was early, it was, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, there was any time of the day, there was practice rooms downstairs that were never completely full, hardly ever. So I would just go and practice and practice and practice in those rooms. And so I actually moved into New England Conservatory, and I fooled people to the extent that people thought I was a student there. Even in the cafeteria, I'd say, oh, I lost my meal card, my meal plan card. And they say, oh, don't worry, come on in, we know you're here. And it was a very funny thing that I was able to do this. And I would go to Jaki's class, and I would play at night in the lounge, especially with several of the people that were there. There was a bass player named Bud Weatherby, and a pianist named Gary Peterson. And Gary was a very nice pianist, played piano and organ. And Gary was a student of Jaki Byard's, and still is around. I saw him a few years ago. He still plays on the ships. He plays on the cruise ships a lot. If that industry ever comes back, that's where he'll be. He's been doing it for years. And so I also studied composition with Joseph Maneri, and I would audit classes. I would make friends with teachers. I would go either to the cafeteria at school, or there was a place down the street called Ann's Cafeteria, which had really some things they did great, like chicken croquettes, believe it or not, was an art at Ann's Cafeteria, and the fig square. Amazing things like flaky pastry with this kind of fig jam inside. Fantastic. So I would go there, and sometimes I would see teachers, and I would ask them, like Robert Di Domenica, the composer, of 12-tone music, if I could audit his class, because I had friends in the dorm that we would talk all night long. A guy named Don Tarshis, who unfortunately died last year, and I stayed close throughout our lives, as did Mark Belair, who's a wonderful percussionist and now a kind of renowned poet. He's been published and writes beautiful poetry, lives in New York. His son writes for Jimmy Fallon, and we're still friends. So David moved to California and writes films. So anyway, I was down at New England Conservatory, and my life was such that I would do that. I met a guy named Ernst Oster, who taught Schenkerian analysis, which one of my tutorials, I'll talk to you about that. But anyway, Jackie, I'd go to Jackie's classes. Gary Peterson and I would play in the lobby. There was a piano. So after dinner, we would go there almost every night and play an hour or two with all the cats. We'd jam in the lobby there. And then Gary started getting gigs in the strip shows over in the combat zone. And Gary got me into that gig. And then he kind of left that gig because he got busy with school and everything. And I believe that's when I met Bobby Nellums and Bobby Ward. Both Bobbies died in this past year. It's been a heck of a year that way. I won't get into that. My friend Chick Corea died the other day too, and I didn't expect that. Nor did I expect any of these, but we won't go there, okay? Anyway, they were both considerably older than me. About 10 years older than me, than I. Bobby Nellums was a wonderful piano player who ended up playing with Mingus for a while. And Bobby Ward, I ended up making Bobby's on two of my records on Xanadu, which are, maybe some people consider my best records. I sure loved him and loved Bobby Ward. I learned a lot from both Bobbies. Anyway, we would play there in the strip shows. I did that for about 6 months that year, and played the strip shows with Bobby and Bobby and Bobby. We were three Bobbies. And then I would come back, I would say play the strip shows, grab a submarine sandwich at Oogie's, which was a place that was open all night, maybe have a little something to drink over at the Lobster Claw after the strip show, come back to the conservatory and practice for a couple hours in the basement and go to sleep, and then wake up around noon, and the next day would continue. I also at that time played with Gunther Schuller was president of the New England Conservatory at that time, and Ed Schuller, his son, was beginning to play bass, and Ed became a great bass player, and still plays, and has made records and played a lot with Lee Konitz, as did his other son George, but George was a little boy at this time, and I became kind of we had a little group with Ed and a pianist named David Stewart, who was a brilliant young pianist. I hear he's playing again. He's been in and out of music, but David was a very special cat. And young Ricky Ford was also often in that band. And a drummer named Anton Fig would often play with us. He often played with Stanley Sagoff too. Anton later became the drummer on, I believe it was David Letterman, but he was originally South African. Anyway, we would play this, and this was my life at 17, 18, and staying up all night with people from the conservatory, learning about classical music, trying to make piano reductions and learning to be possibly a conductor. Because as I said in the Bill Evans story, I wasn't sure that I would be welcome in jazz with the racial situation the way it was at that time. But I didn't worry about it. I was learning, and Jackie was a big help to me. And then it all came to it didn't all come to an end, but my relationship with Jackie took a very strange twist. And I learned one of the great lessons in life through this. What happened was Jackie, Jackie's students did a recital, and Gary, being among those students, decided he'd like to play one of my early compositions that I had written, a tune called Gloria's Tune, written for a friend of mine's mother. And, it was a jaunty little tune, and it had a little bit of a rough passage on the bridge. But it was, playable. And Gary and I rehearsed it, and he was going to do a trio version because everything was trio that night with Jackie's students, I think solo and trio. And we did a few weeks of playing this tune, and Jackie, Gary put it on the program. And Gary got a little nervous when he performed it, and he actually got lost in it, kind of messed it up. I don't remember exactly how he messed it up, but I wasn't happy with the way he played it. And being young and having the arrogance of youth, I guess, in a certain way, or just maybe it was me, whatever it was, what I did was not acceptable. But I didn't know that. After the concert, I said to Gary, "Oh man, you really messed my tune up. I don't even know why you'd want to play it if you're going to mess it up like that." I was not kind to him. And I didn't realize it, but Jackie overheard me talking to him, and I guess you would say putting him down, So next time, a couple of days later, Jackie said to me, "Man, the students are a little resentful that you don't really go here, and you don't, so I really don't want you to come to the class anymore." And I had the feeling that that wasn't really the reason, because I got along with everybody in the class. I didn't really see any hostility toward me. But I said, okay, I don't know what it is, and then Jackie didn't, single me out, because sometimes he would play with me after the class. We would stay, we'd have a few minutes, and he would just play some duets with me and hang out with me, or we'd have lunch, he would talk to me. He was very friendly, as was Louise, his wife. And all of a sudden, Jackie was like, "Man, just don't want you to come to the class." And I talked to him and this and that, and I felt a draft. He was just kind of cold to me. And that went on. And that it really didn't end. We never resolved anything. I just didn't know why, but he just suddenly couldn't use me. Now we cut to a few years later. This was 1970 now. I was 18. And I didn't see Jackie again until 1975. I was in Nice for my first trip to Europe. The summer, I was there with Chet Baker. And it was La Grande Parade de Jazz, George Wein Festival in Nice. And a lot of musicians came to that festival. And Jackie even sat in with us with Chet one night. I remember Jackie was upset because George Wein, they were both from Boston, they knew each other. Jackie knew George when he was first starting out with his club Storyville. Probably even before that, they went back. And Jackie was a little upset because George had not hired him. So Jackie was just going around sitting in with everybody, saying he wasn't getting paid, and just there to have fun. So we said, all right. I ran into Jackie, and he still was a little bit of gave me a bit of a draft again. It was a little bit cold. So I said to Louise, I said to his wife, why? What is it with Jackie? Did I do something? I must have done something. But he's not, he's not really being very responsive or friendly to me. She said, well, you should ask him yourself. I think it might have something to do with Gary Peterson. I said, what could that be? So I went to Jackie and I said, Jackie, can we get this straight? Why? I know you upset at me for something. What did I do? Please tell me, because I really need to know. I feel bad. So he said, okay, I'll tell you what it is. He said, it's what happened with Gary Peterson. I said, well, he said, well, he had played your tune, and you didn't like the way he played your tune, or he had messed it up a little bit, and you were cruel. You were mean to him. You told him, you know what you told him, and you made him feel very bad. Jackie said you almost brought him to tears. I saw that, and you had no compassion toward him. And Jackie said, you have to be humble, man. You have no humility. you were, arrogant. And I mean, if anybody plays your tune, he chose to play your tune. He could have chosen anybody's tune in the world. And if somebody plays your tune, they chose your tune. You don't care if they mess it up. The thing is, they chose that tune. You should be honored that they chose the tune. And it was your song that they played. And didn't you see that? Can't you feel that? And I saw the error of my ways. I said, wow, Jackie, you're right. The fact that anybody even chooses to play your tune is an honor. It's something special. And you're so right. So from there we made up. And he even hired me to play with him and a bass player named Nabil Tota, a great bass player. They had a duo at a place called Willie's. And and there was one other club too that I played with Jackie at. And I got to play with him again, and I learned a lot from him. He was one of the most amazing musicians you could ever encounter, just a total master. And I don't have to say, and I can't say enough accolades about him. But everything, the things I teach you about scale permutations and that whole idea, Jackie had that whole concept down. And reharmonizing, analyzing things, understanding how to get to feeling, while using your intellect, but then transcending that. I got so much from even just from osmosis, from being around a guy like Jaki Byard. You got a tremendous amount. And he never really got the recognition he should have had. One of the reasons is Jackie didn't want to travel. He was very devoted to his family. And, he really didn't want to go on the road. He wanted to watch his kids grow up and be around them and be a dad. And he was a joker. He was always laughing, always finding something ridiculously funny. One time he was playing, when he was in Nice, he was also sitting in on saxophone with people. So one time he went to sit in with Ruby Braff and George Barnes. They had this band with Michael Moore and another guitarist named Wayne Wright. And they didn't use a horn, but Jackie was sitting in. They were playing something like Sweet Sue, and Jackie was playing his tenor. And Jackie was playing the tenor, and then nothing was happening. When you go down to the bottom, the notes weren't working. So while he's playing, he's kind of got this curious look on his face. And now there's like about 2,000 people out there on an open air amphitheater type of concert. And Jackie's like he's playing and he can't, something's not right. He takes the solo and he starts, he plays the chorus, he stops, and then he's scratching his head and mugging and like, what could it be? He's like looking like that, going like this. And then it was France, we were in Nice. So he reaches into the bell of his horn. And I think he might have done this and planned this as a joke because that's how he was. But he said that his wife had packed it for him. He pulls it into the bell of his horn. He goes into the bell of the saxophone and pulls out a baguette. In other words, a French sandwich, like a submarine. He pulled it out of his horn. He pulled it out of the bell of his horn, and then he could play. But the audience fell out. He held the sandwich up. It was like Charlie Chaplin or something. It was like a hilarious pantomime. And that he died the way he did, which we won't go into here. It was very sad. But I always have these fond memories of Jackie.